Standing atop the ledge, the leaders of the 4 lines looked out over the gathered cats. Bright Moon stood at the front and proceeded with her announcement about the games after everything had settled down from the outburst. Normally, the way the competition goes is line versus line, but having discussed with the other leaders, we have come to the decision to treat it as a team game. 2 cats from each line will form a group of 8. These groups will be your team until the finals. The cats below started a hushed conversation with one next to them, and a murmur spread throughout the crowd. Bright Moon waited for them to quiet down before continuing. Each game will pit each team against one another, with the rules for continuing being best of 3. After the final 2 teams compete and one comes out a winner, then the 8 cats within the group will split to 4 teams, 2 from each line, and compete against the other 3 lines' groups to see which one prevails and where the rankings will stand. Rippling perked up her ears at this as she heard Duskling laugh. If that's the case, the 6 of us can be a group. We just need 1 more bear line fledgling and 1 more coyote line fledgling. The guardians beside them looked at each other, amused, but did not refute that they may not be allowed to select their team. Now, you all may pair into your desired groups of 8. I suggest you pick your teammates wisely. Remember, they first have to carry you to overall victory before you must face them. Selecting a weaker link in the hopes of beating them in the final may not be the best option if you intend to progress. Bright Moon and the other leaders watched the cats scatter. I know just who else to grab. Come on, Mintling. We're gonna go grab Oakling from the coyote line and Lionling from the bear line. Without waiting for a response, Duskling took off across the meadow in search of the fledglings named. Mintling rolled his eyes before following after her with a flick of his tail towards the group, waiting on their return. After a couple moments, Duskling and Mintling returned with 2 more fledglings. One of the 2 stepped forward, causing Rippling's eyes to focus on them. The young Tom has dazzling silver fur striped with black on each leg, and 1 stripe down their back from their nose to their tail tip, kind of like a skunk stripe. His eyes met Rippling's, and for a moment she saw something flash in them that she could not identify. You must be Rippling. It is a pleasure to meet you. You can call me Oakling. Oakling put on a gentle expression and dipped his head to Rippling, who just stared at him confused. Mintling rolled his eyes and shoved Oakling aside with his shoulder while giving Rippling an apologetic look. The guy is a major flirt, but he has a good heart. If you can get past the initial irritation, he makes a decent friend. Oakling looked at Mintling offended, while the others chuckled. The other young Tom they had brought cast a sideways look at Rippling and twitched his ears. He had an orangish pelt with white paws and ears. I'm Lionling. Best of luck to our group in the competition, so we may be the ones in the finals. Rippling flicked her ears in return as she took in the appearance of Lionling and felt a fleeting thought at the back of her mind. He's not fond of being a guardian fledgling. Shaking herself out of her slight stupor, she settled in watching Mintling and Oakling bicker as they waited for the other groups to finish forming. Many of the fledglings were eyeing where the lieutenant's group sat, but after seeing many approach only to be turned away by the cats there, they realized the fledglings had already decided to form a group and had gathered the last 2 members they desired for their group as soon as they could move. The group itself looked overly intimidating to the rest of the fledglings present, as 7 of the 8 cats were popular for their skills in one area or another. The only unknown was Rippling. Rippling felt many piercing gazes on her pelt from all around, some envious, some curious, some even hostile. It was not hard for her to understand why, given she seemed to be surrounded by cats with varying degrees of popularity. The cats begrudgingly found enough to make their groups of 8. There were 4 groups in total, which meant there would be 3 rounds of games before the final. Casting her gaze around the clearing, Rippling looked at each group to see who from the wolf line was where. It was not shocking to see Ashling and Petalling as a pair in one of the groups. Next, she saw Featherling and Frogling paired off. Lastly, she saw Dustling and Stemling together. Feeling a nudge against her shoulder, Rippling turned to see Flameling looking at her. If I'm going to be honest with you, it's going to be Ashling and Petalling's group we see in the semifinals. Those 2 have an agenda for doing whatever they can to win, even if the method is underhanded. They manage to do so just out of sight of the judges every time. Mintling nodded as he eyed the group of 8 that included the mentioned cats. After his outburst, I'm sure Ashling is going to set out on a vendetta, especially with the fact that we took to Ripple fairly quickly. Those of us from the lieutenant fledglings tend to block out the others to a degree because of the greed in their eyes. I'm sure after this competition, you'll start getting similar looks, Ripple. Confused, Rippling looked around the group, who mostly looked back at her with sympathy, outside of Swiftling, who seemed to be contemplating something. As the group seemed to be finalized, Brightmoon started speaking again. Now that it seems the teams have been decided, let me explain how the contest is going to flow event-wise this time. If your team loses on the first game, do not worry, as you will get to face the other losing team from the opposite matchup. The one that loses that matchup will also split into the 4 groups of 2, just as the team that won both of their matches. This will give us not only a ranking of which team places where from first to last, but will also give an idea of which fledglings may need to focus a bit more on their training in one form or another. Looking around the meadow, the leaders saw a decent amount of the fledglings tense up and glance at their group members nervously. Brightmoon showed an amused gaze as she continued. Those that face the pair competition at the bottom of the bracket will be subject to a task of their mentor's choice, and whether they complete it or not will decide if they have passed. Take note of where your fledglings are and who they are grouped with, then proceed to go and group up with the other mentors of said group. Many guardians got up and made their way towards the others who were responsible for training the different fledgling groups. In the process, Rippling saw 2 guardians making their way towards the group and realized they must be Oakling and Lionling's mentors. They settled in next to Ivynose and the others and waited for Brightmoon to continue. Now that every cat is where they should be, I will give you the course of events that will decide the winning and losing groups. The final for the pair competition of the winning group will not be announced until the group is split to avoid any chance of preparation. The first competition will be a best-of-3 hunting match. 3 pairs from each team will gather prey. Each pair will be matched against one of the opposite pairs on who can gather the better prey. Take note, Brightmoon did not say the most prey, but the best prey. Willowwing stepped forward and added, "We do not want you thinking you can go out and catch some scrawny or sick prey in the hopes to pass it off as a higher quantity. We will judge the prey by how plump it is, whether it carries disease or not, and whether it has been handled disrespectfully. In this way, the pairs with the higher quality of prey will win." A murmur spread among the fledglings as some were nervous and unconfident in their ability to judge the prey past it being plump. The second competition will be a best-of-3 sparring match. Each of the remaining 2 groups will select 3 individuals they believe to be the best suited for mock combat. The team that wins 2 of the 3 battles wins and will move on to the final competition for pairs. The 2 losing groups will do the same, but the one moving on to the pairs task will be the team with 3 losses. Streamflow was the next to step forward and speak out about the semifinals. Nodding her head, Rippling kept her eyes on the ledge where the leaders stood, waiting for the next information or signal to start. It was easy to feel the anticipation in the air from all the surrounding cats, and it was starting to get to Rippling as well. With that, please select the 3 pairs you wish to participate in the hunting competition. The remaining 2 cats can help bring the prey back and sort it based on who caught what for it to be judged. When time is up, you will hear us call you back. Upon hearing the call, you must stop hunting, even if you are about to catch a mouse. There will be guardians monitoring each pair, and if they see you make a move on prey after the signal to stop, your pair will be disqualified. Rose Dust spoke up next, giving the signal to discuss and prepare for the first event. Each of the other groups started discussing, and Rippling turned to her teammates to see what opinions they had, but they were all staring at Swiftling. Rippling turned to look at the calico-patterned Tom and tilted her head quizzically. Lionling and Mintling will form 1 pair for the hunt. Duskling and Flameling will form another, and Rippling and myself will be the 3rd. As for the combat part of the competition, Oakling, you will be 1 participant, Rainling will be another, and then Mintling, I hope you do not mind being the 3rd choice for the competition. Swiftling gave out assignments efficiently, and all the others just nodded their heads without complaint. Seeing her confusion, Lionling decided to speak up. Swiftling knows our strengths and weaknesses, so he can give us the best option for each of us to participate to our fullest. Oakling nodded next to Lionling, and the others just shrugged, showing they were used to it. Finally, Rippling just nodded her head, showing she understood, and sat waiting once again for the other teams to finish deciding on their pairs. As the bustle settled down once more, all of the leaders looked down at the groups, then at each other, and had a slight discussion on which one should be paired up in the first round. Once the decisions were made, Rosedust was the first to step forward. The group, consisting of Swiftling, Oakling, Lionling, Mintling, Duskling, Rainling, Flameling, and Rippling, will be competing against the group with Mossling, Coldling, Birchling, Thornling, Crowling, Hazelling, Featherling, and Frogling. Streamflow stepped forward next and nodded towards the remaining groups. The other two teams will compete against each other as well. Line up into the pairs you decided on for the hunting competition so we can see who will be paired off for the judging. All the cats set about moving into their decided pairs with the extra two sitting just off to the side. Rippling felt a nudge against her shoulder and saw Swiftling signaling for her to move a bit away to the spot with him, showing they were paired up. Rising to her paws, she followed him while feeling a piercing gaze against her pelt. Choosing to pay it no mind, she settled in next to Swiftling as the leaders started to pair off which pairs would be judged against each other. Her mind began to wander slightly before she was brought out of her thoughts. And finally, Swiftling and Rippling will be judged against Coldling and Featherling. Hearing her name called out, her ears twitched slightly, and she raised her eyes to gaze up at the leaders, giving them her full attention again. Brightmoon was at the forefront of the ledge, again looking down at the gathered cats, but Rippling could have sworn she was staring at her. Shaking her head at the absurdity, she felt something brush against her side and turned to see Swiftling giving her a reassuring gaze. Now then, with all the pairs knowing who they are competing against, these are the rules. 1. The prey must be caught by you or your partner. You may not steal your prey from your competition or pick up already dead prey that may have been killed and left behind by something else. 2. All prey to be judged must be set in a pile by the mentors of the pair in the meadow to show it is part of the entry. If it was caught by you but does not make it to your pile in the meadow before time is up, it does not count. 3. The pair not competing may help gather and bring back prey for their teammates to help save some time for those hunting. Finally, have fun. While this is a competition, it is still meant to be had in the spirit of fun and enjoyment. All the leaders looked at each other one last time and smiled before looking down at the young cats below that were having trouble staying still. With that said, there was a pause before all 4 leaders spoke at once. Let the games begin. With the signal given, the participating pairs leapt to their paws and darted off in different directions into the forest. Okay, so if you've made it this far in the reading, this next bit is a small extra scene for Chapter 7, mainly because I want to give a little bit more to what was written. While it's not the exact word count I was hoping for, I got everything written and how I needed, so I decided an extra scene would be the perfect thing to add on to give a little bit more length to this. So I hope you guys find it funny and enjoy the little banter between the leaders. The 4 leaders watched as the young cats raced off to start their hunt, their eyes glued to one particular pair. I never thought I would see the day in which Swiftling took to another cat as quick as he just did to Rippling. Rosedust shook his head in confusion, even though it was well past when the 2 cats had introduced themselves. Brightmoon stared amused at her friend and fellow leader as he sighed in defeat. I could say the same about Dustling, in all honesty. It took her a whole moon cycle to even open up to rain, and yet she looked ready to drag Rippling back to the eagle line right then and there. Willowwing said in exasperation. Streamflow chuckled at the 2's theatrics before sending a somewhat taunting look to Brightmoon. Rippling took just as quickly to Swiftling as he did to her. I wouldn't be surprised if the 2 end up becoming mates sometime in the future. Brightmoon rolled her eyes at the suggestion, then turned to look back at the meadow. That's still a good way off stream, but I wouldn't say it's impossible. Rippling can see and feel things from others that you wouldn't even realize they were there to begin with until you were made aware of it. It was like that when she met Ivy. She took to him just as quickly, and I would not be surprised if Swiftling experienced something similar to what Ivy did when Ripple greeted him. As for Dusk, she has always been quick of wit and sharp of sight, so she may have noticed something peculiar that she took interest in when it comes to Ripple. I do not mean to say she has bad intentions, just that she may have noticed traits of Ripple others have not learned yet. The leaders nodded their heads as they gazed at the meadow below. Silence fell over the group before Rosedust decided to speak up. So, are we betting on who comes out on top? The Lieutenant's group is easily making it to the finals, but the scavenger hunt is the final event. Winner of the bet gets a pile of specialty herbs of their choice from the loser's territory. What do you say? At the mention of a bet, they all began to choose which cat would shine the most in the competition, and which ones would lose because of lacking in one way or another. As it had become a habit for the idle leaders waiting for the return of the competitors to bet on the outcome,